in the back seat of the family car. I put my head up against the door. If it was dark, the dashboard lights would reflect on the window. The green glow of the display was soft and comforting. It was a representation of our safety, because Dad was driving us home. Throughout the years, Dad shared stories with us, and some of my favorite included him driving. In our living room growing up, there were two framed photos of a young bearded dad riding his motorcycle. These were a favorite of my sisters and myself. When I was young, I never thought about how they were captured in a time long before cell phones and selfie sticks. Dad later told me his friend drove in the car alongside him with the photographer, wrapped in a seatbelt and hanging out the back window. Dad and his older brother Joe were only a year apart in age. Due to Uncle Joe needing to repeat kindergarten, they ended up in the same grade. One day, Dad and Joe decided to skip school. They took the bus and spent the rest of the day playing hooky at the Milwaukee Zoo. My grandmother had insisted that the kids memorize their address, so when they asked the bus driver what bus they should take to get home, he personally drove them to the nearest stop. They would have arrived home on time, and no one would have been the wiser, except the bus dropped them off in the opposite direction of their normal walk home. When their auntie saw them coming the wrong way, she phoned Grandma, and they were busted. Dad's favorite car was a 1951 Chevy. It was that same 51 Chevy that Dad and his brothers cut the roof off of one Wisconsin summer. They used a cutting torch, and as the metal heated, it dripped onto the seats. With the roof removed and holes burnt in the seat, they drove the car like that the rest of the summer. While Dad impressed us as kids, sharing how he only spent $30 for his first car, other short stories he didn't share until we were a bit older. Dad was once pulled over for driving a Ford Triumph with no exhaust. When the officer came up to the car, they recognized one another. Dad worked with the officer's wife, a flight attendant, and had even been to their party at their house. The cop paused and then said, get out of here," letting Dad drive off without even a warning. And another similar story, Dad was yet again pulled over, and this time he'd been drinking. The officer told Dad that his girlfriend needed to drive the rest of the way home. Dad told us that not only had she been drinking quite a bit more than him, but she had never driven a standard transmission in her life. I was surprised to learn that Dad had actually been a school bus driver while living in Chicago. Supplementing his income at Chicago O'Hare, he drove an adjusted van after his shift, picking up ADA children. Dad always had a heart of gold and grew up with his brother Junior, who had Down syndrome. It's no surprise that he was not only willing to drive these kids, but happy he could help. He proudly shared with me about the 5 kids he drove, all in wheelchairs. He said, and I quote, "It was really an awesome experience." He went on to say that one of his favorite kids had cerebral palsy. He didn't speak much or communicate well, but he was a huge Cubs fan, and he brought his radio with him each day. Dad had him sit right behind the driver's seat where he could get reception, and they would both listen to him carrying the Cubs. Years later, in 1989, Mom and Dad packed up the 3 girls and made the hard choice to move from Wisconsin to Michigan with Dad's job at the airline. Big sister Sarah, almost 7, got to ride in the U-Haul with Dad, and baby Chelsea and I followed behind with Mom. As always, Dad was leading the way, driving us to our new home and our next adventure. Unfortunately, the adventure turned scary when Mom was suddenly no longer in the rearview mirror. No cell phone and no way to contact each other, the situation looked bleak. Dad pulled into a long driveway, planning to ask to use the phone and likely call the police. Before he had alerted any authorities, he saw Mom pulling into the driveway. She had spotted the U-Haul just by chance, and they were reunited. I've heard this story many times, and it's hard to believe. Dad said he really couldn't believe it either. They were lucky, and the rest of the move was a success. Dad's job at the airline blessed us with access to standby flights, allowing our family of 5 to travel back to Wisconsin and retain a relationship with our extended family. After moving to Texas in 1992, we often flew up north for special occasions and summer visits. Standby flights had one disadvantage though. We were not always guaranteed a seat on the plane. One visit to Wisconsin, the flight home only had 4 seats available. Dad decided Mom should take the 3 of us home, and he would remain stranded behind in Minneapolis. The 4 of us boarded without Dad and took our seats, spread throughout the airplane. Suddenly, I saw Dad taking a seat close to me. It turned out one of the passengers was a pilot and offered to sit in the very uncomfortable cockpit jump seat for over 3 hours in order to make room for Dad to fly home with his family. Dad indicated to me I should remain quiet. Now that I'm a parent, I know how stressed Mom must have been, literally flying solo and expecting to get her 3 girls home alone. What a relief it must have been to discover Dad arrived in Texas with the rest of us, ready to drive everyone home. On September 11, 2001, I, like all of you, remember where I was. Our family was in Wisconsin for my Grandpa Fisher's funeral. Chelsea and I still argue about what cartoon we were watching that morning, but we turned the TV off and headed to the church before we heard our country's tragic news. Our uncle approached us in the parking lot and told us what happened. Scared and confused, and certain our lives were about to change, I remember watching the iconic footage of the second plane over and over on the small TV in my grandmother's farmhouse. On top of everything, our nation's tragedy caused our family a dilemma. Living in Texas, with the country's planes grounded, we were stranded in Wisconsin. As always, Dad came to the rescue, and he prepared to drive our family over 1,200 miles home. The small sedan, packed with luggage and teenagers, would not have been the first choice had we known a cross-country trip awaited us, but we made the best of it. On our drive home, we saw American flags, and the radio only played news updates, Martina McBride's Independence Day, and Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA. Soon, low on gas, Dad pulled off to find a gas station. We were shocked to find the line extended down the street, and what felt like the entire town was waiting to fill up. Needing to get his family home, Dad worried they would run out of gas before we were able to fill the tank, and we all swore we'd never forget the name of that tiny town. Years later, none of us could remember. At one point along the 18-hour journey, a plethora of antique cars started passing us going the opposite direction. We guessed a car show must have ended, and the drivers were headed home. Mom and Dad called out the makes and models as they passed. I'm so impressed they recognized all those cars. The last day of the journey, the sun going down, a long day behind us, and an hour before we were home, the family was asleep. I talked to Dad from the back seat, asking him questions, keeping him talking, worried he'd fall asleep. Then, like always, we pulled into the driveway, and Dad returned us home once again. In the years that followed, our country had changed. I couldn't have imagined that both my brother-in-laws and my husband would one day fight in that war. However, as a freshman in high school, life mostly went back to normal. One change was airport security. Families were no longer able to meet their loved ones at the gate when they landed. Dad, however, who had worked 38 years for the airline, had access to employee-only hallways that bypassed security. Each summer, when I flew home from a week in Wisconsin, my bag filled with back-to-school clothes, I alone had someone waiting at the gate to welcome me and drive me home. That October 2001, I went on my first date. I was planning to meet my boyfriend at the discount cinema. It won't be hard to guess who drove me to the theater. Dad was ready to go, so I grabbed my hand-me-down combat boots my sister gave me from ROTC. In the passenger seat, I put my foot up on the dashboard and began to lace up the Marine Corps boots, when suddenly my foot slipped and I kicked the windshield, breaking the glass. Wide-eyed and panicking, I looked at Dad. I don't think that he wanted to ruin this special experience for me. Dad drove me to tell me at the theater. Last week we celebrated our top wedding anniversary. The next story I share with permission, as it was a secret for many years. One day, in her freshman year of high school, Chelsea and one of her best friends visited from out of town. They told Mom and Dad they were going to another girlfriend's house. Someone had the idea to go to a different friend's house, and assuming Mom and Dad would say no, Chelsea didn't ask permission. Suspicious, Dad found out they were not where they said they would be and went to pick Chelsea up. On the drive home, embarrassed and apologetic, Chelsea asked if she was in trouble. Dad said, no one else needs to know about this, but you need to get a job and don't have to go anywhere for 2 weeks. Chelsea did just what she was told on that drive home. That week she got a job at Little Caesars, and 5 years later she was assistant store manager. When she shared with Dad that she was ready to find something new, he suggested the county, where he was working at the time. This December, Chelsea celebrates 13 years at the county. In 2008, Mom and Dad drove up to Wisconsin, where they met Sarah to attend a wedding she was a bridesmaid in. After the celebration, Mom flew home, and Sarah and Dad stayed to visit some additional family and drive the car home, with Grandma seated chest as their precious cargo. Since they were driving near Chicago anyway, Sarah suggested that they stop at Wrigley Field for a Cubs game. The plan was to arrive early and have a few drinks before comfortably arriving at the game. Unfortunately, traffic caused them to barely make the game. Luckily, the sketchy tickets they bought from a stranger online were real, and they made it to their seats. They sat behind some Brewers fans and next to a little girl with a My First Cubs Game sign. Dad said Sarah should have made a sign too, but she reminded him that it might be a little odd as she was 24. By the end of the game, they had befriended the Brewers fans, but were still disappointed the Cubbies lost. They hit the road, planning to get a few hours in before stopping for the night. But when they were finally tired enough to stop, they were in the middle of nowhere. Spotting 2 semis off the side of the road, they decided to park between them, thinking they would be protected by the trucks. At some point, both trucks started up their roaring engines and drove off. Upon waking, they were shocked to find the trucks gone. Somehow they had slept through all the sound. Then they started on again. Sarah said she remained in a fog, and Dad drove the rest of the way. Over the years, I have many stories of driving with Dad. Many trips to the mall, to sleepovers, and softball practice when we were kids. When we were teens, he taught us to drive and laughed with the police over when I got pulled over for going too slow. He held me by my first truck and bargained like a pro while I sat there in awe. He drove to North Carolina to bring their car my first year of marriage, and he drove me and my dogs to the opposite coast 5 years later when I moved to California. He drove his motorcycle across the country after retirement, visiting friends and family while enjoying the open road. On the day he died, Sarah messaged us. She said she saw an old man on a motorcycle on her way to the hospital, and then an old Dodge pickup, white with a red stripe, on her drive back home. I knew Dad was on the open road again. Many people believe there is a rainbow bridge on the way to heaven. It's often thought you meet your pets there and they will walk with you to the gate of eternity. I, however, believe something different. Dad will be waiting there in his extended cab ticket. I'll climb in the passenger seat, scooping out my childhood tabby off the front seat and into my lap. I'll ask him if he's been waiting long, and he'll lie and say no. I'll reach back and scratch behind the ears of my favorite dog as Dad asks how my trip was. I'll smile and start to share, and Dad will drive me home one last time.